Hello, everyone. I'm Raymond Yeshuafar, the incoming president of Sephardic Temple. Thank you for joining us tonight for our Distinguished Speaker series. Sephardic Temple has had the honor of hosting many great speakers, including Rabbi Lord Sachs and Senator Joel Lieberman, and tonight is no different. As we continue to celebrate our centennial socially distant, we ask you to visit our website and join our mailing list to continue to get information about our up-and-coming events and our temple membership. I would like to thank Mr. Sam Yabri, Mr. David Suissa, and our Vice President of Social and Cultural, Mrs. Neda Netizadeh, for tonight's program. Now, I would like to invite our esteemed Rabbi, Rabbi Tal Sessa, to share some words with us.
Shalom, everyone, and to our beloved guests. We just spoke of Rabbi Sachs, so beloved David Suissa, one of the things we learned from Rabbi Sachs of righteous memory is that influence is greater than power. David, while you may not occupy a formal position in leadership in Greater Los Angeles, your impact on the cultural and communal well-being and vibrancy of Greater Los Angeles is more impactful than many of us who hold formal positions. May Hashem bless you for your passion, for your truth, for your wisdom, for humanity and humility. And may we all be blessed to continue to be enriched and led by you culturally and communally for many long, healthy decades to come.
Thank you.
Dear Sam, also a beloved friend from me and the Sephardic Temple community. As we just said, it's been 50 weeks since I've had the pleasure of personally introducing you to Rabbi Sachs. And when I did, I said that Sam is one of the great leaders of the emerging new generation in the Persian Jewish community because you're a great leader and 30 years after. In retrospect, almost a year later, I feel that it was a diminished introduction because you're growing, Sam, to be a great leader in Los Angeles and God willing beyond. Setting aside electoral prospects, you're a leader by virtue of your passion for justice, for tradition, and for the betterment of our city, our country, and the world. We extend to both of you, Sam and David, our heartfelt blessings, and Hashem should bless you in all your endeavors. And I want to thank next in line, the elegant and wonderful Mrs. Neda Netizadeh, who will formally introduce the two of you. I just want to say to the two of you something that I would not have said had today not been a day unlike any other day in almost a quarter of a millennium in which the United States has been in existence. I think we would be remiss if the two of you would not speak from your heart and from your reason about the shocking things we have seen today happening in our country. So we rely on you to be the leaders of stature that you are and to help us make sense of what our eyes have seen in disbelief today. With all that in mind, Bruchim Habayim. Thank you.
Rabbi. Thank you. Good evening and Happy New Year, everyone. It's great to see such an amazing turnout at our Distinguished Speaker series tonight. As challenging as this pandemic year has been, we at Sephardic Temple have continued to bring you great programming, such as tonight's, and will continue to do so. Hopefully in the near future, we can all meet back at our beautiful temple like we used to, with hugs and kisses on both cheeks. Tonight's distinguished guests, Sam Yabri and David Suissa, will be exploring the future of Los Angeles, examining how the post-pandemic recovery will take shape, as well as public safety and the dire homeless situation in our city. But first, a little background on our featured speaker. Sam Yabri is an attorney, community leader, and a former Los Angeles City Commissioner. Sam is a graduate of Yale University and USC Law. Named a Southern California super lawyer, Sam has a private practice, Marino Yabri, here in Century City. To name just a few of Sam's community and pro bono activities, Sam has been on the board of Betzedek Legal Services, receiving a Gala Award in 2016. He also serves on the board of EDA, an organization that serves adults with disabilities. He sits on the Board of Trustees of the Jewish Community Foundation of Los Angeles. He's a former board member of the Anti-Defamation League. He's one of the lay leaders of the Builders of Jewish Education, the Jewish Federation, and 30 Years After. Sam also served as a member of the Board of Civil Service Commissioners for the City of Los Angeles, on the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force for LA City Attorney Mike Fewer. He also serves on the Board of Directors of the Friends of the Westwood Library and the Comstock Hills Homeowners Association. Sam is an avid Dodgers fan. He lives in Westwood with his beautiful wife and 4 adorable young children. Some of you may not know this, but I'm proud to say Sam is also my super intelligent and impressive cousin. Of course, everybody here knows Mr. David Suissa, President, Editor-in-Chief, and Publisher of the Jewish Journal. Welcome, gentlemen. Without further ado, I will hand over the screen to the 2 of you. If anyone in our audience wishes to ask a question from our speaker, feel free to type it in the Q&A box on the bottom of the screen, and we will get to it at the end of the program. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Neda. And thank you, Rabbi, for your kind words. I feel very much at home when I enter the orbit of Sephardic Temple. And before we start our conversation with my dear friend, Sam Yabri, I have to say that the fact that this is a series in honor of your 100th anniversary, I think is very special. And I'll tell you why. Because 100 years ago, the world was coming out of the last major pandemic. It was the Spanish flu that killed more than 50 million people across the world. It was the biggest disaster America had seen. It started in 1918 and it lasted about 2 years. So what's kind of incredible about the fact that Sephardic Temple, Tiferet Israel, was born right at the end of the last epic pandemic crisis that America went through. So it's unbelievable to me that this event, where we're talking about the future of LA post this horrible year that we've all been through. And, you know, Sam and I are not prophets. We can't see the future. We can discuss issues. So you're not going to get any big answers tonight or any big reveals. You're going to get a conversation between 2 friends who love this city and who'd like to see it improve. And I think it's kind of really meaningful to me that we're doing this on the 100-year anniversary of the last major crisis. And look, we've come a long way. And we're not only are the Jews resilient, not only is America resilient, but LA is resilient. And that's something that should anchor our conversation tonight. Now, of course, not only is this the 100th-year anniversary, it's also one of the craziest days I've ever experienced in my life. As someone who lives with the news, I thought I saw everything until today happened. So I think maybe we ought to take a couple of minutes to deal with the elephant in the room and the madness that we all saw in DC. Sam, is that okay with you?
Sure. I'm sure it's on everyone's mind. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's on all of your minds. So we're going to deal with it, and then we'll jump into the formal title of today's conversation. Sam, you want to start?
Sure. I want to start with a couple words about Sephardic Temple and how special it is. Like David said, it feels like home. Our son's bris was held there. I was there at those wonderful talks by Senator Lieberman, Rabbi Sachs. I've always enjoyed looking on the walls and seeing those names as they evolve from Turkish names to Moroccan and now more Persian names on the walls. And it really shows the vibrancy of our city and the Jewish community here in Sephardic has been a big part of that for 100 years. And God willing will be a vibrant part of the city for another 100 years. And I'm thankful to Neda, to Rabbi Sessler, to Raymond, to Avi for organizing this really important event. So, I think like David, being an immigrant to America and Los Angeles, today was a really hard day. The things that we watched on the news and were receiving text and video instantaneously as they happened were things that we never thought would happen in this country. sharing kind of conversations with my father, and he recalled the days of the Iranian Revolution and what it felt like, the unease and the fear, and it reminded us that this great democracy that we live in, that's been a safe haven for our community, is fragile, is that it's worth fighting for. And at some point, we have to come together as a community and get past the partisanship and get past the teams that we're on politically and realize that we're Americans first. And I was uplifted by some of the words of President-elect Biden going back to what Lincoln talked about, and that this America really is an experiment, this last great hope, and it's worth fighting for. And I think today was the darkest day in my life. My friends and I were debating whether today was worse or 9/11. And in some ways, this the fact that this was domestic, these were fellow Americans challenging the rule of law and institutions, it really made it scarier and not much more profound. So I'm hopeful that one takeaway from today, and that we can transition to this conversation, is that a role that we all have to play in whether it's federal politics, but really these local issues as well. The beauty of a democracy is that we have that power. If we wield it correctly and responsibly with data and facts and science, and we do it collaboratively and together, we can make this a better city and a better country and a better world together, and a stronger Jewish community. I'm sure David can talk to this too. I think our Jewish community locally is more divided than I can ever imagine that it ever would be. I thought things would get better after the election, and I fear that it's going to take a lot of time to heal. And I know there's a role for the Jewish Journal, for Rabbi Sessler at Sephardic Temple, to bring us all together. So that's certainly one big fear, is that our community is so divided that we need to figure out a way to come together.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Sam, because you gave me a perfect segue to talk about the fact that at the Jewish Journal, those divided communities, they both read the same paper, right? I have huge readership with people who really, really do not like Donald Trump. And I have a significant readership among people who really, really support Donald Trump. And one of the biggest challenges of an editor-in-chief is to find a way to elevate the conversation without alienating anybody. So I've developed a voice, what I call a voice of observation, rather than a voice of instant judgment, which I have in my head. But what I share with the community is kind of observations. I try to look at things and try to understand them. So when I saw the madness today, there's the David Suissa voice, which is, this is crazy, and it's very judgmental. But then when I write to the community, I'm thinking there was a violation of sanctity. Throughout the summer, there were some horrible demonstrations that were really violent. There was some, Antifa demonstrators that took over a police precinct in Seattle. There was an enormous amount of looting and, vandalism and so forth. So it's not as if violence was new. It's not as if protest was new or anger was new. The reason today struck a nerve is because they violated a sanctity. They went into the Holy Temple, which is the Capitol, Congress. This is where Abraham Lincoln spoke, and George Washington and our founders, right? This is where they went. And that's why it shook all of us. And I got to tell you, as somebody who's always looking for silver linings, believe it or not, I found one today. You know the silver lining that I found? Even the biggest Trump supporters came out and condemned today's activities. And I get hundreds of emails. And when did that happen? So from the right to the left to the middle, it was pretty broad consensus that we had gone too far, that you can demonstrate, you can protest, you can even go crazy on the streets. God knows we've seen craziness on the streets. But the minute you breach that sanctity and enter Nancy Pelosi's office and mess with her lantern, and just do these kind of weird, like just, I think this was why this struck a nerve with me, with you, with Rabbi Tesler and all of us. And I can just say, you know, in Alcoholics Anonymous, they have a line that says, you got to hit your own bottom before you can have any chance of going up. And I really think today we kind of hit our own bottom. There was something almost epic about the fact that on the very, very last day that Trump had any hope of something happening, on the 1 in a million chance that maybe Vice President Pence would do some weird stuff, right, when they do the certification. But today was the last day. And I think there's something epic about on the very, very last day, we had this conflagration. And I'm seeing tomorrow as the beginning of a new chapter, that we needed the closure that we're getting. By the way, to all of you listening right now, as we speak, certification and counting of electoral votes are happening in Congress right now as we speak. So forgive me for speaking so long, but I had to get that out. And now we can talk about LA.
I do hope, David, that we did reach the bottom and things don't get worse. And one thing that I want to mention about the Jewish Journal that I appreciate is that you've evolved under your leadership from point counterpoint to actually focusing on people and stories and history. And I think that reveals that we're in this together, and the best ideas are not on the extremes, and no one is winning. This is not a zero-sum game, whether it's politics or community or Israel. These are things that are nuanced, and I do want to commend you for doing that, because I think it's really important, is that whether it's the journal and dueling op-eds, the best ideas are ones that come from, from our tradition, right? The Talmudic tradition of debating and getting to the core of it.
Well, it's amazing you bring that up, Sam, because, I often tell people we want to provoke thought, not anger. And you're right. A lot of times, papers think they're doing the right thing when they give you the guy on the left, woman on the right, blah, 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 But the truth is, the real Jewish voice is the voice that's got both inside of them, both the right and the left. Whereas the real voice we want to emulate is the complex voice. Like my friend Yossi Klein Halevi is the best example. He's got the right and the left inside of him at all times, right? So in that kind of struggle between different viewpoints, where it's always in a state of motion, just like the Talmud is, that's really the kind of voice we want to model. Otherwise, you go to a Shabbat table and the ones on the left are fighting with the ones on the right. I'd rather have the complex middle at a Shabbat table any day of the week. So speaking of complex,
yes,
all right, we have 3 issues that we advertised. 1 is homelessness, 2 is public security, and 3 is post-pandemic. And I think we can just take it in that order. One thing I like about you, Sam, is you've been rolling up your sleeve now for 20 years. So I'm not talking to a generalist or just a philosopher like I am. You've been in hundreds of meetings, and I've seen your post on Facebook. I see how you talk about public security, about homelessness, but these really complex subjects. I used to go downtown to Skid Row and film. I've spent time with homeless people. I spent 4 months with a homeless Jewish woman, Natalie Levine. There's a part of me which is all compassion. And then there's a whole other side to me, which is, this is almost an unsolvable problem, right? That's almost how I feel. And it's like the worse it gets, right? So I don't think we're going to have any great solutions tonight, but what we could do is at least dissect the problem so we can understand the issue a little better and maybe know where we go from here.
Sure. That's helpful. It's a helpful framing, because I think there's an instinct to simplify this and say, why don't we do this? Or why don't we just do that? And I like that you frame this in human terms, right? For every person, we'll get into the statistics. I'm going to share statistics. I think it's helpful, both dollars and numbers of people. But each person has a story. Each person can have a great future, and they're living on the streets because of some trauma in their lives, right? So, and our city and every big city has always had homelessness, but there are reasons why in recent years it's exploded to such a point that it's on everyone's mind, and it's a top issue according to every poll, and it really is affecting every aspect of our lives. So just a little bit about the statistics. Every year, the city and the county partner to count the number of homeless people, called the Homeless Count. I participated this year in Westwood. We, on a cold January night before COVID, we marched down Westwood Village and counted people who were sleeping in parking lots and cars. And until you actually do that, you'll never really see these people and really appreciate what they're experiencing. So the numbers showed that pre-COVID, there were 66,000 homeless people in the county of Los Angeles, 41,000 in the city, a 16% increase from 2019, all pre-COVID. And some of the reasons why it's exploded in recent years, and we can divide into buckets and get into specifics, is one is the mental health piece, right? That we've had a massive decline in the investment in our mental health and safety net. Mental health hospitals have closed, boarding cares have closed, but that is a big issue. Something like 25 to 35, depending on the statistics, possibly more, are of folks who are unsheltered or have severe addiction or mental health issues, and they're not getting the help they need, whether it's because they don't want it or because they're just not available. That is a big part of it. The other part is obviously economic, right? Rents have increased. There's a massive affordable housing shortage. Thousands of people in this city are a few $100s away from being evicted from their homes. That unlawful detainer is the difference between living in an apartment and then living in your car or worse. And we have this massive housing shortage too. And third is just this year, really a confluence of the COVID pandemic, where local authorities have been instructed not to move, or folks who are living on the streets or encampments, plus federal rulings and activism that has really changed the city's approach to what it normally does with respect to people who are camping out or living on the streets. And as a result, the situation has exploded. I'm happy to talk about what the city and the county are doing. I think that's really helpful. The city and the county have spent a lot of money and a lot of effort to help folks, and there are some successes. It starts in 2016 as a city that we voters in the city of Los Angeles passed Prop Triple H, $1.2 billion bond that was promised to build supportive housing, 10,000 units in 10 years. Unfortunately, it's been slow going, and our controller has indicated that almost 5 years in, we're less than 300 units built, although there's several thousand in the pipeline. So due to bureaucracy, the cost of construction, there's some instances of fraud and abuse. These units are not getting built. Nevertheless, people are getting shelter. Something like approximately 22,000 people last year found housing. The problem is almost 29,000 folks fell into homelessness. So the need far outpaces what we're able to do right now. And what we need is, the theme here is, we need more urgency and we need more efficiency. And another positive aspect of this is that there's some really innovative approaches to homelessness. I spent a lot of time researching, understanding what's happening. We're finally moving to the direction of converting motels, tiny houses, which are like sheds, or prefabricated shipping containers, modular housing, things that cost a lot less. Building brand new construction with Triple H money has now been spent. We've read these reports, $500,000, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 per unit, as much or more than what market rate luxury housing is costing. These things could cost a lot less. We should have started this a lot earlier, but they're finally being implemented now. And another positive thing is, we always want to talk about the positive, is the COVID pandemic has showed that what we can do when government is forced to tell people in an emergency situation. We've seen that in FEMA-like situations elsewhere, but here with Project Room Key and a couple other different programs, where the city and the county were able to house 4,000 people within weeks. The private sector played a huge role. Real estate companies and others lent their leasing agents to convert hotels and motels to homeless housing. Recs and parks were used for this purpose. These aren't permanent solutions, but they're able to control the situation during the pandemic to prevent the spread. But we still need long-term solutions. And there are some out there. The city owns a lot of land, 7,500 units, including a massive plot of land, 170 acres by LAX, that can be utilized to build housing for folks who are homeless or supportive housing. There are, and the VA, we all know, is almost four Disneylands, 400 acres almost, that could be used to house every veteran. There's been lawsuits to that effect. So there are solutions there. There's new methods. We just really need to take some leadership. And it really takes all of us to press our leaders to make this a priority, because I think it really is a priority for all of us. And there are human consequences because of this. Just last year, almost 4 Angelenos died on the streets from homelessness, almost 1,400 people. So every day we delay and we take too long, we spend too much money, people are dying. So that's the humanity aspect of this as well.
You know, I'm glad that you brought up the idea of innovation, because I remember when I had this homeless woman and I didn't know what to do with her, I just reached out to whoever I knew. So I met with Yaroslavsky, and I started kind of digging into the whole system. So I got to experience the bureaucracy. And somebody was sending me someplace, sending me to another place. And then finally, I got introduced to this really innovative organization called Step Up. And it was a partnership between the government and private industry. And the whole idea was to be holistic, was not only to provide shelter, but also to provide a psychiatric component that included medication, and also a job training component. So, and I think, you know, Yaroslavsky, our fearless, you know, legend in Jewish LA circles, made it one of his missions for years. And that's the one thing I remember him telling me, is that you got to think holistically, because it's not just about shelter. So I think there's innovation potential there. I love that you brought up the idea of those containers, because I see a lot of these new approaches. And also, we have to remember that the world of real estate is going through a major disruption right now. Especially, you look at a city like New York City, where the big majority of all the commercial real estate, people are now working remote, and they're not going back to their office by the tens of thousands, right? That's going to allow huge amounts of commercial real estate. That might be an opportunity to transfer, to convert some of that empty and useless commercial real estate into housing, because we know that housing is a big crisis. So you and I are both kind of, you know, we like optimism, we like solutions, so we can't help but look in that regard. And I really think that if we have just great leadership, we interviewed Mayor Garcetti in our office at the Jewish Journal a couple of years ago. And one of the things that struck with me is that he goes out and speaks to the homeless. He's out there. He really cares. And unfortunately, the solutions, it's not just one group. It's going to be like a coalition. Right. And there's the federal, state, local, municipal, and there's private industry, you know, to have to rally. I can tell you that the person that I helped, a big part of it was the mental health issue. And there's, you just can't get around that problem with just shelter. Right. So I'm glad that we really dissected this problem today. I think that in the Jewish...
If I can just add though, in terms, I'm glad you mentioned Step Up. There's so many organizations who have this, who are doing this incredible work. Well, it's LA Family Housing, who are developing these projects. Yeah. There's these smaller organizations like Alexandra House, which are basically, they'll take a single family home, bring several families together and have job training and financial security. There's literacy classes, and they're all responsible for each other. But these things need a lot of help from the government sector and the private sector. And one of the issues you talked about, mental health, is the city doesn't have a health department, let alone a mental health department. It's limited to police and fire and sanitation, housing to help the homeless. The county has the health department. There's a joint agency that helps as the money flows from the state or the federal government with restrictions. And there's rules about how you use those dollars. And so it really is a leadership puzzle. And it really does take that coalition, like you're saying, and it's the private sector to come in as well, to create those job opportunities, those housing opportunities, that it will take all of us to tackle this nut. And it really is incredibly complicated right now to build in Los Angeles supportive housing, affordable housing. I know this from experience on the board of ETA, which is building this incredible 64-unit village, with what it's called on Pico, across from Pat's. And it's going to be housing for adults with special needs, with job opportunities on the ground floor, but going through the maze of tax credits and financing and permitting. These things should be easier for nonprofits to build, to provide this opportunity. It's actually very, very hard at the soft costs and the consultants they have to hire. It takes years and years. So I think there's, we as a city, as a community, we need to figure out a way to prioritize these types of win-win projects for the community.
And in the meantime, the optics are terrible. So in terms of people like us who are not involved in the solution world, you know, we're not politicians, we're not elected leaders. You know, all we see is there's more and more homeless. We see them in our communities and we see them everywhere. So I think that just adds a lot more pressure, and it doesn't help the problem, because it makes the problem very emotional. People get very judgmental. They don't want homeless people in their neighborhood. It lowers the value of real estate and all the things we hear about all the time, you know? And I think it's one of those complex issues that demands and needs really visionary leadership, that where we can have some hope. The problem with bad optics is you lose hope, because you get a sense that, you know, there's no hope. Everywhere we go, we see homeless people, and that's the conversations, the private conversations in our homes is, did you see where they have homeless encampment now? This is what people talk about. There's one in, you know, Rancho Park. And then I go on the boardwalk, Venice Beach, to go with my kids, and I see a huge encampment, and we don't know what to make of that. So all we see is a problem that gets worse. Sometimes I wonder if it's a catch-22. If the better we do, maybe the word gets out among the rest of the homeless across America, and then it creates an influx. I remember in the 80s, there was Santa Monica, which is very liberal, was allowing, you know, homeless camp tents on the beach. And next thing you know, they all came from downtown, and everyone, eventually it was too much. And they had to kind of, you know, kick them out. So it's also a catch-22, but God willing, we'll have some visionary leadership. So shall we go to number 2?
Sure, let's do it, David.
Yeah. Now, number 2 is also, speaking of sensitive, oh my God, public security. You know, when I heard defund the police, Sam, you know, the first thing that came to my mind is, this is the best slogan for Donald Trump. This is the worst slogan I've ever heard in my life. Defund the police. Like, why would I ever want to defund the police? When I see a policeman, I see somebody who's going to protect my children, right? I'm not saying there's no bad cops, but I'm saying, you know, I come from the third world. You see a policeman, you don't really know if they're going to be on your side or not, right? So the fact that, you know, we have policemen that try to protect us and keep the neighborhood safe, and even in the inner city neighborhoods across the country, in Minnesota, where we saw a lot of the demonstrations this year, I don't think it really helped the African-American communities in the inner cities to pull back on the police. And we heard stories about the police was pulling back, and it was making situations even worse. So that was not my favorite part of the year of 2020. I thought it was it was kind of sloppy thinking. I understand there was a tremendous amount of anger after the killing of George Floyd. I get all that. But defund the police ended up infiltrating the ethos of society, and it came to LA, and next thing you know, people are saying we got to defund the police. Can you give me a more complex take on that?
Yeah, so I agree with you that it's not a constructive slogan. First of all, not everyone agrees on what it means, right? Some of the leaders of the defund movement actually want to dismantle or eliminate funding. Some want 95% of the funding to be cut. Others describe it as an opportunity to reimagine policing and improve policing. And secondly, it doesn't accomplish the goals of what I think we all want to see. We all want to reduce instances of police violence. We want to reduce instances of police bias, racial profiling. We want a better police force. But some of the things that we need to get there actually cost more money, not less, right? To enhance the training of our police officers, that costs more money, or adding mental health professionals in addition to police officers, not in place of police officers, to some of the more complicated calls of mental health, or that costs more money, not less. So it is, I didn't think it was constructive, but we are where we are in terms of this. It's important to frame the defund movement as part of also where we are as a city during COVID. The city found itself in a massive deficit, almost $700 million. And at a time also when the police union was getting a raise for its officers. So it became a tool also to rein in spending. But I agree with you that it's a dangerous thing to do at a time when crime is up and we're not exactly sure how that money will be spent. And so there was that first cut of $150 million that City Council approved. There's been now subsequent proposals to cut additional officers, something like 350 sworn officers and many more officers that are not.
Are you
sworn.
concerned? Are you concerned, Sam, that there are too many cuts that may have a negative impact on security and public safety?
So I'm a father of 4 little kids. When I was raised in Westwood, I would walk to the local public elementary school. I'd walk without my parents nearby, and I couldn't imagine my kids doing the same thing. Maybe that's more of the climate in general, but I do think that it's on a lot of people's mind. We were promised that the money would be spent to be reinvested in communities that are vulnerable, communities of color. We saw with that the first batch of money looks like it's going to street services, paving roads, or it's not necessarily doing the things that we would hope, right? Job training, after school programs, things that actually uplift people and possibly bring down crime. I am worried that that if we reduce policing in some areas, like you said, affluent areas will hire their own private security, and less affluent areas will be stuck with gangs, right? That could be one consequence. We've seen that in other places in other countries, third world countries, is that could be a consequence if more painful cuts are happening to our police force. So the data supports that violent crime is way up. We've had more shootings and more murders in 2020 than we've had in 20 years. And I think anecdotally, we all feel that there's property crime and other crimes are up as well. So it's certainly a troubling time, and especially as the economy continues to suffer, I think there's certainly a sense of anxiety that we're worried that what additional cuts could mean for our communities, and especially for the Jewish community, right? At a time when anti-Semitism is at all-time high, the notion that we will have fewer police officers to help us, protect us, is certainly troubling, and it should be on all of our minds.
Right. So how do you feel looking forward? Do you see the leadership that we need right now in LA to kind of tackle this problem? Because it seems to me, the number one thing a government should do is keep you safe. We can have a lot of debates on other issues, but safety is number one, whether you live in a poor neighborhood or a rich neighborhood. It seems that it's number one. And in fact, since the Rodney King riots, there's been an enormous progress in LA in terms of fighting racism in the LAPD. And I think one of the things that's gotten lost in all the noise and craziness of 2020 is we completely forgot about the word progress. So if you just look at racism in America and you compare America in 2020 to America 50 years ago, when blacks could not go into a restaurant in the South and so forth, I mean, there's an enormous amount of progress, but that kind of got downplayed. But even if you look at LA in the past few decades, would you agree that there's been progress made with community policing and so forth?
Well, the data supports it. So 80% of the LAPD are now people of color or women. It's a vast departure from the days of a white police force under Daryl Gates that would terrorize people. It still happens, but the numbers are far down. There are police cameras, there's more technology, there's more accountability. We can always have more, we can always have better training. We can always have police officers who aren't 18 years old but come in with college degrees. There's so much that could be done on that end. But we are, I think, a model for the country in a lot of ways in terms of we are improving. I think that's a starting point is, like you said, we should commend the progress and then from there find ways to continue to improve. And some of those things require more investment and people coming together and thinking about what can we do to improve community policing, do more innovative things. If we have to take away, at a time with the recession, we may have to take away responsibilities from police officers, sworn officers who are armed to do things like traffic stops or mental health stops. And that's sort of what the Reimagine movement is. which has been rolled out in a pilot project. Hopefully that leads to good results, and that's the goal here. I do have concern that, again, I think we all want to, we can do two things at once, and that goes back to what we talked about earlier, is we can oppose racism, we can oppose police violence, but we can keep our community safe. It doesn't have to be a zero sum, right? These things, the policies, we have to think through what the implications are. There have been some who've talked about withdrawing police and allowing social workers to do a lot of this work. What about the liability for if you send a 25-year-old unarmed social worker to a potentially dangerous domestic violence call, right? That's violent by definition. So I think we need to think through what the implications in this area is. And like you said, I firmly believe, especially for local government, our number 1 and 2 jobs as any city government would be public safety, safety and services. And that's what we can talk about too, is that the COVID response and what we're doing as a city, what we need to do as a city. But safety and services, that no one else is going to provide police services, right? There's no state or federal government that's going to fill the gap if LAP disappears. So that I agree with you. Public safety is certainly a priority here for everyone.
I smell a great column in the Jewish Journal, Sam. So I'll be following up with you on that.
Would love that.
There is something that always kind of stays on my mind in terms of spending money. When I did a podcast with the controller, Ron Galperin, one of the things I love that he said is total transparency. If one of our listeners tonight would like to know where all the money goes, you mentioned a few minutes ago that some of the money went into like paving roads and other kind of things, right? Is there a place where an ordinary citizen can go and find that information?
Yeah, so Ron Galperin, our city controller, who was a leader in the Jewish community before he became our controller, cantor at Temple Akiva in Culver City. He has made a lot of this information public, where our dollars are spent and personnel spending, and it really gets very specific. This most recent issue of where the $150 million cut in policing would go is still being debated. And different council members are fighting for projects and programs in their respective districts. But right now, as a city, less is a focus on spending. It's really where the cuts are, and that's what's should be troubling for all of us, is that there's a 10% furlough proposed for all city employees, which means our streets are going to be cleaned less frequently. There's going to be a deferral of repair and maintenance of our infrastructure. We should all follow the city council. I mean, there's less attention on what the city council does. But I think right now, one takeaway from this program is what happens at the city level, the county level, really has a massive impact on our lives on a daily basis. And some of the stuff is easily available. Others you have to go to, and with COVID now, you can actually watch some of these city council meetings, these committee meetings, these commission meetings, depending on the topic you're interested in. But you can get that information. And if you're really aggressive, you can request information. They have to give it to you under the Public Records Act in California, effectively the Freedom of Information Act. So there are ways, and there are neighborhood groups that are really active, homeowner groups, neighborhood councils in each area that stay on top of our elected officials and are held them accountable. They show up and answer questions. And that's something that I encourage everyone on this call to consider joining or getting involved in, because that's open to everyone. And that's certainly a way to have a big impact.
This is a perfect segue to our third and last section, which is perhaps the biggest crisis of my lifetime, the pandemic. And one of the fallouts of the pandemic is the lockdowns that created a total disruption and the shrinking of the business activity, which resulted in an enormous loss of tax revenues. So when you say we lost hundreds of millions of dollars, a lot of that came from the lockdown. So we're not going to solve the pandemic in a few minutes, but I'd like to tackle a couple of issues on the pandemic. And I want to start with the issue of credibility of our leaders. One thing I remember very well from this past summer was how before the riots, before the demonstrations of Black Lives Matter started, you got a sense, whether it was here or whether it was New York, the leaders were saying it's very, very important, physical distancing, you got to stay at home, you can't have groups bigger than 10 or 15 or what have you. And they were very strict about that, especially de Blasio in New York and Cuomo. And then all of a sudden, you know, the average people like us, we see tens of thousands of demonstrators across the country. And there's a real sense that they got a pass, that because it was connected to social justice, then all of a sudden the issue of physical distancing was not as important, and wearing a mask and so forth. And our leaders, our elected leaders, took a kind of their credibility took a shot. And I'm not sure they've recovered from that. What's your take on that?
Yeah, obviously, I think the most recent instances, right, with the governor at French Laundry, the supervisor at an Italian restaurant, the same day that she said it was dangerous and irresponsible to eat outdoors.
Right. Pelosi in the beauty place. Yeah.
Pelosi. And I think there's understandable and justified anger there, right? Everyone's suffering, and we expect our elected officials to play by the same rules and to lead by example. Obviously, same thing with Trump sometimes, right? Is that he didn't lead by example on especially with respect to COVID and masks, things like that. So I think it's a good point. I think that we need to hold our elected officials accountable and on all aspects, whether it's how they live their lives during this pandemic, but also the policies that they advance. And you mentioned businesses. On one end, businesses are suffering. Many of them may not come back, right? Every week we hear a report of some great restaurant or some great business that we care about disappearing forever. And then on the other end, you have workers and tenants and people who are living on the brink and are a paycheck away from eviction once the moratoria may be lifted. So it is a very precarious time. It's a dangerous time. You talked about the deficit. If you think about the things that a city relies on to pay its bills in good times, sales tax, parking fees, the hotel occupancy tax, business tax, all of those things were 60, 70, 80% were shut down. So that explains the $700 million deficit that the city has now. And it is a difficult time for the city to manage that. And we need to figure out a way to get everyone back to work as fast as possible. We need to figure out a way to revitalize neighborhoods. It's always so painful to see businesses boarded up, whether it was a protest or COVID or possibly going out of business, in all these neighborhoods that we care about, on Pico and Robertson, Ventura, Westwood Boulevard. It's everywhere. There are some bright kind of some silver linings or some light at the end of the tunnel, not only with the COVID and the vaccines, but also what's going to happen in this part of town. The subway's coming to the west side, Beverly Hills and Century City, and then Westwood Village by 2026. That's going to have an opportunity to revitalize neighborhoods and create new investment and new housing and new jobs. And then Pico near your hood, with Google coming in Westwood and Pico and the Expo line, there's an opportunity to really revitalize Pico. The streets are in disrepair, the alleys feel like a third world. There's an opportunity with investment. Some of that will come from the federal government to create these infrastructure programs, and I think that we should demand our share of funding to revitalize our neighborhoods, obviously in partnership with each neighborhood, so we maintain and preserve each community's character and unique aspects. But there's opportunity for all of us to dig in and to shape the next few years, especially with the Olympics coming. That's something that is on a lot of our elected officials' minds. But we have a long time to get there. We need to keep people in their homes, and keep businesses thriving. And like you said in the beginning, with people being able to work virtually from anywhere, that value proposition in living in Los Angeles is now kind of wobbly, right? People with homelessness, and there's public safety issues and this COVID response. There's a lot of businesses that are thinking about relocating, or families. And anecdotally, like you said, there's people in our community who have left or thinking about leaving. And I hope everyone on this call reinvests in Los Angeles and rolls up their sleeves, like you said, and figures out a way to make this a great place that we all know and love. And it's on all of us to figure out ways to get through this together.
Well, a lot of the buzz right now in the community is around the businesses and the individuals, some of them quite prominent, who are moving to places like Texas and Florida, because the tax situation is a lot more favorable for them in those states. So there's some genuine personal financial incentives for people to leave California. Does that concern you, Sam?
Concerns me so much. We've lost friends who've moved to Florida. I've lost clients who've left the state. A neighbor of ours left to Orange County to get away from what she considered a kind of a city in decline. My family, I moved here when I was a year old as a refugee, in America, in Los Angeles specifically, was this shining city on a hill, this perfect place. Of course, there's homelessness. Of course, there were issues of crime, and arguably the crime in the 90s was far worse than anything we're experiencing now. But there's that anxiety that a lot of us feel. And I think for the Jewish community, it's a particularly big threat. We've always had that affordability debate. It costs too much to live in LA. It costs too much to be Jewish here. But with housing and now these other issues, if more and more Jewish families start leaving our part of town, that's our schools, our synagogues are going to suffer. It really is a major threat. And I know I've spoken to Jay Sanders and others of the Federation. It's on their radar, but I view it as a very substantial threat to the Jewish communities if people start thinking about moving in a meaningful way. And it's incumbent on all of us to find ways to solve these local issues so that our city can, so our Jewish community stays strong. And there's a lot of other issues we haven't touched on. Pico and Doheny, under our homes and schools and synagogues, there's 50 active wells. They're not being inspected and monitored. Rabbi Yonah you've written about it, the Jewish Journal. Rabbi Yonah is fighting the good fight, but that people smell methane when they walk to shul. These are real issues that need to be solved in order for this to be the incredible city that we all love.
I didn't realize how much you and I had in common, because I feel when I hear you speak, a sense of real loyalty to this city, that when it's down and out, that's the last time, the last thing you want to do is leave when it's down and out, when it needs you most. And I sense that in you, that you're not going to bail, that now is the time to really roll up your sleeve, because there is so much to love about this city. Pico Robertson is one of the greatest Jewish neighborhoods in the world.
I agree.
Right? And I go walk on the beach once or twice a week, and I'm in heaven. Yeah. Right? And there is so much to love about this city. Yeah. The kaleidoscope, the multicultural aspect of this city. It really is. If we forget that with the dark news.
Yes.
Right now, the pandemic, I think it always goes back to the optics. A friend of mine called me from Ventura Boulevard. He said, Suissa, you can't believe this. Half of the stores are boarded up. I drive down Pico on a Saturday night, and I see stores boarded up. I went and filmed on the Santa Monica Promenade in the beginning of the pandemic on a Sunday afternoon, when there were normally hundreds and if not thousands of people, many of them from around the world. I saw hardly anybody. I saw a few homeless on the Santa Monica Promenade. So the optics scare us. They're chilling. We see our favorite restaurants closed down. We see these synagogue buildings that have been empty for 9 months, right? Instead of praying in these beautiful buildings, we're praying outside on the asphalt, on a parking lot, right? So there's a real concern that we're going to pick up these new habits where we're not going to need to go to the Westfield Mall because we can get everything online. Yes. We can see we don't need to go to the movie theaters. And in many ways, some people are happy davening at home on Zoom, right? So I think one of the great anxieties is which habits that we picked up during this pandemic are we going to keep even after the vaccine? There's no answer to that. I'm not expecting an answer because we don't know, but it is part of the anxiety. And I want to sit here and tell you that I'm glad you're not bailing, Sam.
I think, David, it goes back to our experiences as immigrants, right? We've lived elsewhere. We've started new lives here. We know what it means to start a new life. The city's been good to us. It's been good to Persian Jews. It's been good to Sephardic Jews from Montreal. It's been good to us. We owe a debt to this wonderful city. And I couldn't imagine my kids living and starting their lives anywhere else. Obviously, we know people have moved to Israel, and that is our other homeland as well. But I think we have a responsibility here to dig in, like you said, to fight for the city, to fight for our community, to fight for everyone who's suffering, the businesses, all individuals of all backgrounds, and we can do it. We really, with the right leadership, with the partnership of the private sector and wonderful nonprofits, all these issues that we talked about are solvable. There's good policies, there's good models to be implemented here.
Well, maybe that's the message for tonight, because we're doing this lecture series is in honor of the 100th anniversary. And when I hear that a synagogue is 100 years old, what I think about is resiliency above all.
Yes.
Right? And maybe this is a time for all the listeners tonight, and as the whole Jewish community should think of resiliency and renew their love for Los Angeles.
Yeah. And renew their membership for Sephardic, right? This is not a year to, rabbis have been talking about this in the high holidays. This is not a year to take off from being Jewish and not being a member of your favorite synagogue or taking a year off. If anything, we should be doubling down.
You know, it's so fascinating, because when the second temple got destroyed in the year 70, we really became a nomadic people. You know, the idea of wandering Jews is not just a cliche. So we have this reflex inside of us, the takeoff reflex. Yeah. Sometimes in synagogues, it's called the breakaway minion, right? So we have this state of constant anxiety. My parents had the reflex. When things got really bad in Casablanca, we left. We went to Canada at the first chance we got, right? So we don't want that to happen in Los Angeles among the Jews. Absolutely not. This is not the time to borrow on our ancient gene of taking off. Not in America, not in Los Angeles, because this country has been unbelievable for us. You know, the scholar Mika Goodman, he said, the Jews had two great dreams in the past 2,000 years. The first dream was to go home to Zion. And the second great dream was to find a land, a place, a country, a nation that would take them in as equals. And both of those dreams came true in the same century.
Right.
And one of those dreams is America, right? And despite all the mishigas we hear, despite all the instances of anti-Semitism, we know that there's never been a country for the Jews like there's been America. And we know that very few immigrant groups have given back as much as the Jews. And in the past decade, at least, the Persian Jewish community in Los Angeles has given back. And I would love to see a giving back movement that can ignite in 2021. I'd like to see the Jews actually roll up their sleeves and get onto those websites. I think it would be great to have one website. You and I can talk after this meeting on where you go on the one site and you can have access to any kind of local civic kind of opportunities or information that you need to know, because it's time for us to get involved. You know, the synagogues need to replenish their membership dues. The vaccine is coming along. There's rays of hope. We need to support merchants. There's so much that needs to be done, because the optics are not on our side right now. When we walk down the streets and we see empty, what we're thinking about is maybe we should bail too. So we need to kind of transition into a new attitude, really, is what I'm talking about, where instead of thinking, you know, I'm giving up and I'm going to Florida because I'll make more money because of taxes, you know, we stick around and we make it work. I have friends of mine who did move to Florida, Sam. They miss LA. LA.
There's no community. There's no Jewish community like we have here. In general, this vibrant city. Even when you're stuck in traffic, you just look outside. The weather and the culture, the diversity. It's really a special place. I'd love to work with you on that project to find ways to get everyone involved in some way locally.
Yes, it would be good. So we'd finished our hour, and if there are any questions from the audience that Netta would like to share with either Sam or I, we're all business. This is the quarantine. We have nothing left to do. He's got to put 4 kids to sleep. So he's
my incredible wife has the first half. I'll help with the other 2.
Okay.
One question from the audience was, what are your thoughts on the new district attorney and how they are already talking of recalling him?
Wow, that's a good one.
Yeah. So I'm curious on David's thoughts as well. So Gascon was overwhelmingly elected on a platform of reform of all types, not just the prosecution side but also the opportunities for rehabilitation of folks and how criminal justice is done in the city. When he first rolled out his first platform of reforms, there was some real concern. No enhancements for victims of child abuse, elder abuse, human trafficking, and hate crimes. The ADL wrote a very strongly worded letter. The new CEO, Jeff Abrams, took charge of that. And I think that, to his credit, District Attorney Gascon addressed some of those issues and has modified that policy. I think we're all very worried about, in general, about public safety at this time. I think the jury's out to see how these reforms play out. I think we have to give them some time to see if there will be the positive consequences of treating people differently. There's this what's called the jail to prison pipeline of people of color. That the hope is folks will have a better chance at succeeding in life if they're not locked up. So there's some real concern that the consequences will be very negative for public safety. So I think I share some of those concerns as well. I understand the thinking behind the modifications, but I think it's too early to tell whether we'll be less safe as a city. So we'll have to check back in a few months, in a year. Let's see what the data suggests.
Yeah, I'm very much like you on this. I mean, I'm a huge guy for law enforcement. 30 years ago, law enforcement got a lot stronger in New York City. We called it the broken windows policy. They took a city that was down in the dumps and turned it into virtually like a mini Disneyland in Times Square. And I remember the difference. I've seen the power of good community law enforcement. When people feel safe, then investment comes in to a community and a neighborhood. Safety for me is so fundamental to economic growth, to well-being, and so forth. So I'm very concerned about the new district attorney. At the same time, though, I'm reluctant to jump onto these, immediate recall movements. I think sometimes when you get into a position of power, you tend to see more things. I want to see what he does.
Especially with his own district attorneys challenging some of the judges challenging them. I think we should see how these play out.
Correct.
Maybe that gridlock, that friction will lead to some good reforms. Victim advocates and the ACLU, criminal justice advocates, I hope that friction leads to some progress because the current system, which is why he was elected, wasn't working. You saw too many people being locked up, and if you're a Republican who cares about dollars and cents, that's not a good way of spend our dollars. If you're someone who's view this with compassion, it's disproportionately affecting neighborhood communities of color, and there has to be a better way. And I think he's going to try to do things differently, and I think we'll see where we are as a city. The crime statistics and some of the other statistics we'll see how he's doing in a year or so.
Any other questions, Avi?
Yes, sir. Why does our government continue to send billions of dollars to foreign countries rather than take care of our own homeless situation?
So foreign aid has been a part of U.S. diplomacy for decades, and that includes countries like Israel, right? Israel gets more than $3 billion a year, but also countries like Egypt and developing countries. It's a belief that money is well spent to help those countries. There is a lot of money spent on homelessness. Just last year in the city of LA, over $600 million. I think it's a question of how we spend it. But sure, obviously more dollars would help. And I think the Biden administration will double down, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an either or. I think that was raised. I know some critics were pointed out the amount of money that went overseas, but it generally is a small part of a very, very big $1 trillion budget that goes overseas.
You know, one of the great spiritual leaders in the history of Los Angeles was Rabbi Harold Schulweis. And we did a cover story on him many, many years ago. And the most important message he had, because he started a movement called Jewish World Watch.
Yes.
And they would go to the Sudan and fight the genocide in Sudan. And at the same time, he did a lot to help the Jews in LA. The biggest message that he had was that it's not either or.
Yeah.
When you're Jewish, you don't pick one or the other. In the same way that you spoke earlier, you know, you don't pick between, you know, security and police reform, between all these different goals that are in tension. And I think when it comes to, you know, foreign policy, an America that's not engaged with foreign policy is not America. So I do think that there are some abusive examples where it's absolutely exorbitant. I think the $5 trillion that we spent on Iraq and Afghanistan during the wars, I think when you look back, history is going to say that we squandered some money that could have been used in America to fight homelessness and improve education and improve infrastructure and so on. But those are outliers. You know, the good we do around the world is needed. And I'm glad that Sam brought up Israel, because a lot of my friends who say, well, America should stop giving, well, they don't believe that when it comes to Israel. So there is a balance in America between the craziness of spending $5 trillion on a war that never ends and spending smartly. And if I may put in a good word for our President Trump here, you know, he collected on some debts. And when he went to NATO owed us tens of billions of dollars that America was paying for. So in all his crudeness, you know, he's the one that said, you know, we don't want to get ripped off. And he was able to collect. And I think that the future of a smart policy is, I always go back to the word smart, like smart spending, smart government. For me, that's much more important than Republican or Democrat or left and right. Is it smart? And I'm hoping that that's where we're headed. Any others?
Yes, one more. Sam, you said you have 4 young children. I too also have young children. What are your thoughts on the schools being closed during this pandemic?
Oh man, that's really a hard question, right? Because you have schools have duties to their teachers as well as to their students and their families, and weighing those bounds, weighing those interests has been really hard. Obviously with where we are right now as a city with the numbers, we're the epicenter of COVID right now. It's certainly a scary time. I don't envy what the administrators have to do and have to weigh. I think kids need to be in school. I think we should have opened them before we opened bars early on. I think there's a big impact that our kids are going to experience long term, especially if your kids are younger. My kids are under the age of 8, so they are Zooming is not ideal at that age, a critical age where you're learning how to interact with other kids and learning to read, and you're curious, and just staring at a screen all day is really going to impact them. But I don't think there's a right answer. I think that the policy hopefully was led. I got to trust that it's led with science and data, and but these are hard. And as a parent, I want my kids to be in school in person, but I get there's a lot of factors at play.
One more question that just came in. Will you 2 gentlemen be getting the COVID vaccine? And why?
I can't wait. A vaccine. I have a simple rule when it comes to medical issues. I ask my friends who are doctors, who are extremely knowledgeable, and I ask them, are you going to take it for you, right? And if they tell me absolutely, then I know they got skin in the game, literally. And if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me.
same with me. Every doctor that I know, my primary and people that we're close with have already received it, and I can't wait to take it.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Netta?
All right, gentlemen, on behalf of Sephardic Temple and the Board of Directors, thank you. Thank you for this eye-opening discussion on the issues that are so important and relevant to all our lives here in LA. We all have roots here in our beloved city, and we would like to see it flourish so we can hand it over to our children and their generation better than it was given to us. If you learned anything this year during the pandemic, it was resilience. We are grateful to our members for their continued support. As you both mentioned, after all that we have gone through, what we really need is a warm community to go back to. This beautiful congregation has passed the test of time for the past 100 years, and we are looking to the future to celebrate another 100 years and more. Please stay connected, support our programming, follow us on social media, join our Minions and Shabbat services, join our sisterhood with their delicious cooking classes and book clubs and much, much more. There's something for everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Gentlemen, again, thank you. And a big thank you to Avi for helping behind the scenes with everything. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you so much. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you, Avi.
Bye-bye.